Hello, 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 hello. It's us again. Here we are. So this is the exam. There is no new information here. This is what you know already, but I put it up every day because we're getting closer to the day. We have this week, and we've got next week, and then there we are. So this is, for better or worse, mostly worse, this is what's going down. In preparation for that, I owe you guys some things. I owe you guys, I want to say it publicly here so that we commit myself, but I owe you guys some old exam questions and some videos from before. So in the next 2 days or so, we'll have all that stuff up on Brightspace. By the time you have your next class, that stuff will be there. Another resource that's available for you is the Economics Drop-In Center. This is in Newman, second floor. This is run by a person who has gone through the entire UCD system. I used to see him sitting right where you guys are now. And then he went and went to the master's program and the PhD program, et cetera, et cetera. And he's been helping students for years and years with this stuff. He's very good. And so you can either drop in on Monday or Thursday, or you can email him, Gavin, at econresource.ucd.ie, and he will set up a meeting or see what he can do to help you. Okay? He, of course, can be more help the earlier you go to him. If you go to him the day before the exam, it's going to be less helpful than if you go to him 2 weeks before the exam. But he will try to help you either way. Okay? And, of course, I am available to help you as well. And, there we go. Questions about that? Okay. You don't need any appointment just to drop in. You can just show up anytime. But if you can't make those times, dropping in is an option. Okay, here we go. Okay, so this is where we were when we left off. We were finishing up the Keynesian model, the model of the multiplier. And what you're supposed to get out of this model is the multiplier. You're supposed to get this idea that we're supposed to be telling a story, we're supposed to be showing the graph, and we're supposed to be doing the math. We're supposed to have 3 ways to tell any story, and they should all be consistent with each other. Okay. So this is our story, and the fundamental issue here, just to sort of recap it, here we go, is we've got the graph. And the graph, we put income here. And we have planned aggregate expenditure here, so expenditure. And we say there's going to be a relationship between income and expenditure. And we told this little story about people looking at their paycheck and deciding how much to spend accordingly. And that gave us spending that looked something like this. Planned aggregate expenditure was equal to, say, E, some autonomous expenditure, plus CY, the marginal propensity to consume. Right? And that little C was importantly less than 1, but greater than 0. Okay. And then we say, well, that's how it happens. So if there's no income, the economy is going to spend this amount out of its savings. People are going to buy. That's partly foreigners buying our stuff as well. So if we have no income, the foreigners can certainly buy our stuff. And we will consume and invest, and government will spend out of our national savings. And then as our income goes up, we're going to buy more stuff. But importantly, that slope is less than 1. Right? In our particular case, we had the slope of this thing was C. Little c, the marginal propensity to consume. So it's greater than 0, but less than 1. And then we said this has to be, income and expenditure have to be the same in equilibrium because it's just one economy. For an individual, income and expenditure can be very different. You can spend more than your income. You can spend less than your income. But for an economy as a whole, that's not possible because one person's expenditure is another person's income. Right? And so for the economy as a whole, we've got to be at a point where y is equal to planned aggregate expenditure. So this is 45 degrees. And so we've got to be at this sort of point, and this will be equilibrium y. And now I can use this to tell a story. And let me use this to tell a story about a recession. This is an economy that's going along, everything's fine, everything's fine. We got the normal number of people unemployed, so we're not worried about them. That's normal for them. Like, what do we care? And things are going along normally. And then for whatever reason, this year is bad. The story for this is that this year is bad because people stop spending. That's sort of the background story where recessions come from here. But at the moment, just say things are bad. Output is lower than potential output. Output is lower than normal. Unemployment is higher than normal. It's a bad year. And we want to change that. So I'm going to suppose, just arbitrarily, that y star is here. Oh, that did not turn blue. I want to make that blue. Y star, ever so slightly blue. Y star. And remember, in this model, there is no y star. There is no potential output. That is not something we did. We just have these barber shops, and we're waiting for people to go into them in order to, and when they go in, the haircut will be produced. Right? There's an infinite number of barber shops, so we're never going to run out of barber chairs, and this is just how the economy works. So there's no notion of potential output in this story, but I'm sort of putting it on top to tell a story. Right? And I put it to the right of this equilibrium y, because that's the story I want to tell, but it's not in the model, right? And it's a particularly useful story for this model because this model is going to be particularly bad for good times, because in good times, resources are by and large being used. And so this idea that you can just walk into a barber shop and there's no line, that gets more and more iffy the more people are going into the barber shop. But if we have loads of barber shops empty and we're really in a recession, then that's not as horrible. It's not perfect, but it's not as horrible of an assumption. Right? So it's a model made for recessions, really. So this is my story. And I decide that I would like to get output back up to normal. Right? And we say, well, what can I do? Well, what can I do is I can somehow get planned aggregate expenditure to go up. And so our usual story about fiscal policy is going to be that I am going to try to use my policy tools to change E, to change autonomous expenditure. Right? And so I can do that just by making people optimistic about the future. Say, tomorrow is great, it's going to be wonderful. And if they buy that, then autonomous expenditure would go up because they wouldn't be so worried about the future, they would spend now. Right? And so that would do it. But another thing that I can do that's more of a sort of standard policy tool is I could, to get E higher, I could increase G or reduce taxes. This is our fiscal policy. So these would both be expansionary fiscal policies. Either the government could go out and buy stuff, or they could cut everyone's taxes, everyone would feel rich, and the people themselves would go out and buy stuff. Either way, we get more stuff being bought, and that's the idea. That's an expansionary policy, fiscal policy. Because remember, in this story, the reason we have a recession is because people aren't buying enough stuff to sustain full employment, normal level of output. And so there's no point opening a factory because nobody's going to buy the stuff anyway. So we need people to be buying stuff for it to be worth it for firms and people to produce things. Right? And so in this story, I'm going to increase government spending. Say that's the simplest. And by increased government spending, that means at any level of income, I'm going to get more spending than before. So this whole curve is going to shift up parallelly. Right? And so if I do that, trying my best to make a parallel line. Can I? I cannot. parallel line. Shift it up. Say this is up by 10 here. It's up by 10 here, and so on. Okay. And I increase this by 10. I increase spending at any level of income by 10, because the government's just buying 10, regardless of how rich we are, and then everyone else is doing what they were doing before. Then we get a new equilibrium, and let me just arbitrarily bring it down. So suppose I'm really clever at my policy, and I get right to my target, just to our normal level of output. Right? And that is going to be my new equilibrium level of output. Okay. Importantly, this is more than 10. The change in output is more than 10. And let's see, how do we know that? Change in output is more than 10. Because if it was exactly 10, it would have gone up by that much. Right? Because that distance there is 10. And since this is a 45-degree line, this distance here is 10 as well. But it went up by more than that, by more than 10. Okay. This is the multiplier. You spend 10, you get more than that effect on output. Why? Because you bought 10 things. That's 10 things produced. That person that sold you the thing now feels rich. He goes out and buys some stuff as well. Right? And then that person feels rich. He goes out and buys some stuff as well, and so on and so forth. And this is the multiplier. You get more than the effect of what you put in. Right? So this is our story in the model, how you get out of recessions. Okay. Now, once again, I want to point out that we can clearly make this ridiculous. If we continue to increase government spending, output will go up again. That Y star was just something I made up and put there, but it's not really in the model. And so I can get output to go as high as I want just by increasing government spending, increasing government spending, increasing government spending. I can have infinite output out of this economy. Clearly ridiculous, right? And so we are going to want to deal with that ridiculousness, but at the moment we haven't. Okay, so that's our story. If you want to get out of a recession, sort of the Keynesian answer is the thing to do is either increase government spending or reduce taxes. And in the 2007 recession, the US did that. Europe, by and large, did the opposite for financial reasons, which we'll get to later. But this is one sort of set of policies to get out of a recession. Okay. Now, suppose that's what we think we should do. Okay? And here we're coming to one of the two major changes that happened to economics in the 20th century, which is ancient history now, but affects our life today, that makes life today so much better than it was before. So before, in the ancient times, and by ancient times I mean before 1930, we had recessions all the time. Like every three or 4 years, there'd be a recession. All of a sudden, and it's not that the recessions were often, but they were also very, very deep. Like loads of people became unemployed for a year, and then they went back to work. And that was the usual thing throughout the industrialized world, that we had these frequent, really deep, sharp recessions. And now we still have recessions now, but since World War II, in all the industrialized countries, they become less often, they become less severe, and just less dramatic altogether. And they're still like a big deal, but they're less dramatic than they were in the 1800s, for instance. And that's primarily due to two things. One of them is automatic stabilizers. Okay, this is obviously, I have an opinion here. It's primarily due to. That's obviously something that people can debate, and you don't have to agree with me. But the two things that I'm going to argue are sort of major contributors to this are automatic stabilizers and banking insurance, deposit insurance. Deposit insurance will take us a couple weeks to get to, but automatic stabilizers we can do now. So suppose this is the way the world works. Okay? That is, in order to get out of a recession, quickly at least, the thing to do is to increase government spending and reduce taxes. Increasing government spending, you buy stuff, people feel rich, etc. Reduce taxes, you didn't buy anything, but people feel rich, they spend money, and so on. Right? This is the way to do it. Now, suppose that's the case and we get into a recession. We get into a recession, and so we want to do this, right? We've all decided this is what we're going to do. We don't have any political conflict over this being an issue. And in real life, there is, of course. Like, what should we do is up for grabs. But suppose there's no conflict over that. We say, when we get into a recession, we want to increase spending and we want to reduce taxes. It's going to be a problem for the government budget, but it's a short-term thing. It'll help us out of the recession. That'll be grand. Okay? Everyone's broadly in agreement about this. And then the economy goes into a recession. Well, our first problem is, how do we know? How do we know it went into a recession? Right? It's going to take us a while to find out that we're in a recession. Like, first people are going to lose their jobs, and the GDP will go down, and it'll take us a quarter even to figure it out. And people will debate it. They might say, oh, that was just a bad quarter. We're not really in a recession. Sometimes things fluctuate. That happens. So maybe it's 2 quarters or 3 quarters before we really all come together and say, yeah, we're in a recession. Okay? And so there's going to be a delay between when the economy goes into the recession and when people realize that we're in a recession. And you might say that's quick. You might say that takes a long time. Every recession is a little different. It will depend, for sure. But there's certainly some time. Right? It's not like instantly everybody knows. You have to sort of figure it out from the numbers and people you know and all that. So it's going to take a while, however long a while is. And then suppose we all kind of agree. Yeah, we're in a recession. So now it's time to increase government spending and reduce taxes. Well, which one? People are going to have different opinions, right? Some people are going to say, no, we should increase spending. Other people say, no, taxes have been way too high for too long. Let's reduce taxes. And they're going to fight over that. And then we say, well, okay, taxes, great. Which taxes? Well, there's many, many taxes in real life. It's not just T like we had in the model. There's many different kinds of taxes. Do we reduce VAT taxes? Do we reduce excise taxes? Do we reduce income taxes? Which taxes do we reduce? That's a whole thing to fight over and discuss, and reasonable people will have different opinions on how we should do that. And so in a democracy, sadly, very inefficient, we're going to fight over that and deal with that. Forget about the taxes then. Let's increase government spending. And in our little model, government spending is really simple. It's just G, right? But in real life, you're actually buying something, right? And so you decide we're going to increase G. Say, great, we're going to have, this country is sorely in need of infrastructure projects. We need new water lines in Galway. We need a children's hospital in Dublin. We need all kinds of things. Let's buy those things. Well, which things? The TDs from Dublin are going to have a very different opinion on which things we buy than the TDs from Galway. And we're going to have to fight over that. Which things are we going to buy? Right? And that's going to be a whole thing. And in our model, that's unimportant. It's all just G. But in real life, it's really important. Like, okay, you're doing this to get out of a recession, but also we would like to spend smartly. They said to Keynes, like, what should we spend the money on? And he said, I don't care. It doesn't matter. Go to the edge of town, dig a big hole, take bulldozers and push the money into the hole, bury it up. People will get to work digging it out, and that will put everyone back to work. They'll start spending. The shovel producers will start having an income. It'll be great. But real life is, of course, we care what you spend it on, right? So as far as the model goes, we don't care. But in real life, we definitely care, right? Children's hospital would be nice. I'm just saying. People in Galway can suck it. That's just my opinion. But, it's going to be a thing to fight over, right? And so it's going to take time to do that fight. So it takes time to realize that we're in a recession. It's going to take time in real life to decide on what we're going to spend it on. And so now we've all decided. Ivan was right all along. Children's hospital it is. Let's make a children's hospital. We say, grand, we're making a children's hospital. Let's put 100 million euros into the children's hospital. Hey, everyone's decided. Well, that's all well and good, but that didn't actually spend any money, right? You have to go and you have to find the spot. And so you send a bunch of surveyors out there, and they find a spot, and they say, who's selling the spot? And they're negotiating. It takes weeks, months. They go, this isn't a good spot because, the medical waste will flood the neighborhood. Okay, let's move it somewhere else. Oh, there's no access for the rich people of South Dublin. What's going to happen to that? We have to move it somewhere. And there's going to be a whole thing just arguing over which spot to build it, because that's actually important, right? But nothing was spent, nothing significant was spent while you're doing that arguing. So there's a whole other bit of time wasted. And then you say, okay, we're building it here. You go through planning permission, God help you, that could take forever. But you go through the planning permission and you fast track it because it's recession, man. We got to get our act together. And you fast track it only takes you a couple months, and you say, no, we're not going to do the environmental impact statement this time. Forget about that. Don't care about the environment anymore. And you start building it. Well, this $100 million is not like $100 million cash check. It is, first we're going to hire the guys to dig the hole. And then, first we're going to hire the architects. And it's going to take them a few months to draw the thing. And they're pretty cheap. Right? You get a couple, 200,000 euros and you've hired the architects, but you didn't spend the 100 million yet, right? And that was the whole point, to increase G, but you didn't do it. You just gave a couple 100,000 to these guys in funny suits, and they're drawing pictures and stuff, but where's our hospital and where's the increase in spending? Still hasn't happened. And so then you get the guys that dig the hole. It's going to take years. It's going to take years before that whole 100 million is spent. Because you're actually buying something, and that buying something is a process. It's not a day, right? And so all of that means there's going to be long delays between the time that the recession hits and the time that the spending actually happens. Which means during all that time, we've got a recession and we've done nothing about it. Okay. So this is a real problem, right? Like, how long does it take to actually get spending the money? And that's where automatic stabilizers come in. Now, I think the next slide is automatic. Yes, next slide is automatic stabilizers. Oh, it's so professional. Oh, man, you'd think I did this for a living. Automatic stabilizers, that is the next slide. I'm so pleased with myself today. Okay, automatic stabilizers. So what's the idea with this? These are policies that when you go into a recession, without anyone having to think about it or understand it or even be aware that it's happening, automatically increase government spending and decrease taxes. Okay? Now, typically they're not put in because we want automatic stabilizers. Typically they're put in for other reasons, but there are various policies that governments have that have these two effects. Automatically increase government spending, automatically reduce taxes when we go in a recession. So, for example, unemployment benefits. Right, so the way we've got it set up is we think, okay, in bad times people are going to get unemployed, no fault of their own. We should really give them a leg up so that they can, get their act together. We don't want their kids starving the next week. We want them to have some time to find a job and stuff. And so when you lose your job, you get paid some money for a while. Different countries have different whiles, and different amounts of money they pay. But you get paid some money for a while in order to help you get back on your feet and have your family not starve and all of that. Which means, though, and these are put in long before the recession hits, that these policies are put in. You still have to decide to have this policy, but you can decide years, decades before. We decided in the 30s and 40s, right? Ages ago we decided to have these policies. But then when the recession hits, you as the policymaker, the government, doesn't act to actually realize that the recession hit. No? Darren got fired. What's he going to do? Well, next thing he's going to do is going to walk down to the dole and he's going to sign on. Right? And that week, he's going to get a check from the government. Right? And so this is a negative tax. Right? It's not government spending because we're not buying a good or service, but we are giving him money. So it's like we're taxing him a negative amount. This is a transfer payment. We're transferring him money. That makes him feel not rich, but less poor than he otherwise would, and so he doesn't cut back his consumption as much as he otherwise would if he lost his job. So automatically, without the government even having to be aware that we're in a recession, taxes have gone down. That is, we start giving people money just because they become unemployed. So we don't have to know. They know what's going on in their own life. They don't know what's going on in the economy as a whole, but they know what's going on in their own life. They can sign up for the dole and they get this cash. Income taxes are another one. Like way back in the day, we didn't have income taxes. Like we famously had tax people based on the number of windows they have in their house and stuff like that. But these days, since the Great Depression, developing world, generally speaking, and actually the developed and developing, pretty much everyone has income taxes nowadays. That is, the amount of tax that you pay depends largely on how much income you have. If you have more income, you pay more euros. If you have less income, you pay less euros. Wasn't always the way. Like back in the day before the Great Depression, it was based on other things. But when it's based on your income, you get fired, all of a sudden you got no income, and so all of a sudden you're paying no income tax. So your taxes, the number of euros you have to pay, automatically go down when we go into bad times. Not everybody's, but some of the people. And so the total tax that's taken is less, and so you got fired, you feel poor, but you don't feel as poor as you would if you still had to pay taxes as well. And sales VAT taxes are the same way. That is, when you get fired and you lose your job, or you're just plain old worried about the future, or you didn't lose your job, but you're just worried that maybe you will, then you cut back on your spending. Okay? But part of the taxes you pay are VAT taxes. You pay your 20% on top of the cost of the thing. If you're not buying anything, you're not paying those taxes. So your tax bill goes down automatically when we see bad times. Okay? So these are the main ones. Like there's loads of things that serve as automatic stabilizers, but these are the sort of ones that were introduced in response to like really bad times in the 30s and 40s. And also like largely here, like in response to that, now we have a republic, let's try to take care of each other in a way that people felt wasn't happening before. I wasn't there, what would I know? But and this is a huge change because that whole year of delay before you start spending, before you start changing your taxes, that's gone. Okay. And that is sort of our sort of base, one of our main explanations for why recessions have become less severe than they used to. It used to be like 20% of the people would lose their job. Now it's 5% lose their job. Right? It varies by recession. They're still bad, but they're less severe than they used to. And one of the main reasons we think that is because automatic stabilizers are a much bigger part of the economy now than they were before. Again, largely not put in to be automatic stabilizers, largely put in because it really sucks to get unemployed and we should help these people out. But it still has that effect. Okay. Now I want to talk a little bit about monetary policy. We are going to, like in a few minutes, we're going to start monetary theory, and that will lead to monetary policy. But while we're here, while we're playing with this model and it's fresh in the mind, I want to show you how monetary policy is going to work in this model. Okay? And so, trust me, trust me, fools, you fools. Trust me when I say that we are going to have a situation where the monetary authorities, in our case, the European Central Bank in Frankfurt, has close to full control over the interest rate. Not entirely true, but we're going to pretend like they can control the interest rate. They can certainly influence the interest rate greatly in real life. Okay? That is, this is the rate that people borrow and lend from each other. Okay? Now we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the mechanics of this, but just roll with it for now. Like put a star like, this sounds like rubbish, he better explain it later or otherwise I don't buy it. Like that's totally fair. But buy it for a minute, that the central bank can control the interest rate that we pay on loans. Okay. In that case, they're going to be able to use their control over the interest rate to affect real things. And in particular, they're going to be able to affect investment. And one of the things that we've done as we went through this is we have actually redefined, without you noticing, it was a bit of sleight of hand on my part, we have redefined the word investment. It doesn't mean what it means in English in economics. And this is one of the places where people are liable to get confused if they don't pay attention. Like, none of this monetary policy stuff will make too much sense if you have the English language definition of investment. But what we've done is we said, okay, what is firm investment? We had that I, right? And that was firms buying goods and services. Right? Now, in real life, like in English, you can say, I had a little extra cash, so I invested it in the stock market. Right? That makes sense. In English, that's perfectly fine. But for us, that's not going to be an investment because you didn't buy a good or service. You're moving the paper around, which is important, but not what we're going to call investment. Investment is only going to be the purchases of goods and services that make you more productive in the future. That's what investment is going to be. And we did it when we did GDP accounting, when we wrote that I for firms. It was their goods and services that they were buying. Now, it didn't matter, it didn't feel weird then, because when you say investment in English, yeah, it includes the goods and services, but it also includes buying mutual funds or buying stocks or buying bonds or all that other stuff. Right? In English, it means I'm putting some money aside in something that's going to pay me a return. Right? So I'm hoping for a return later on by putting my wealth aside now. And that's English. Right? That's investment. But for us, only some of that counts as investment. Only the money that you're putting aside and doing something that's going to make you more productive or the economy more productive in the future. So buying a good or service. If you buy a factory, that's investment. If you buy bonds or stocks, not investment. Okay? Still very important, but it's a different word for us. Okay? So this is important. So given this new definition of investment, building a factory is investment. Buying inventory is an investment. Going to university, you guys, investment. Right? You're buying a service, such as it is, that is hopefully going to make you more employable, hopefully you're not doing it just for the employability, but hopefully it will make you more employable in the future. Right? That would be a nice thing. And historically, it has been true, hopefully for you guys as well. So we think of this as investment in human capital, what you guys are doing. Investment here. Nothing physically is changing hands, but you are investing in a service. Okay? It goes into GDP, goes into investment. It's lovely. Okay? Things that are not investment are buying stocks in a company, loaning somebody money, not investment, just shuffling paper around. Okay? Important, but not investment. This is important, though. This loaning money for us is not investment. Right? Nothing in the whole monetary theory is going to make any sense at all to you unless you realize that this is what we've done, that we've redefined the word in such a way that if you loan somebody money, you're not making an investment. Okay? You're doing something, but you're not making an investment. So suppose you had a bunch of cash. You didn't have anything you wanted to buy it. If the interest rates go up, that is, when you loan somebody money, they're going to pay you a high interest return. Then I have my money, and I think I can either buy a factory or something like that, something that's going to make me more productive in the future, or I can loan this wealth to this guy who's going to pay me back in a year at this really high interest rate. Well, the higher that interest rate the guy is willing to pay you, the more attractive it is to use your wealth to loan him money than it is to buy a factory. So you have these two choices of what you do with your wealth. And since loaning somebody money is not investment, the interest rate becomes the cost of investment. If I decide not to use my wealth for investment, I get the interest rate. If I decide to use it for investment, I have to forego the interest rate. I don't get the interest rate. So the interest rate becomes the cost of investment. Okay? It's also true if I decide that I don't have cash, but I want to borrow money to build my factory. Obviously, I have to pay the interest rate in order to build the factory. And so the higher that interest rate is, the less I want to build the factory. Remember, we defined housing as investment, if you buy a house. And we do know that, hopefully most of you are aware, that if interest rates are really high, it becomes expensive to buy a house. Because you're borrowing money, you have to pay that high interest rate. And so you're less likely to buy a house. You're less likely to invest if interest rate's high. And this is, of course, the main reason we put housing in investment, because it has this relationship to the interest rate. So this means that the higher the interest rate, the less investment we're going to do. And the lower the interest rate, well, loaning it to this guy doesn't seem like it's very profitable. I might as well do something else that be profitable on my own, more likely to build a factory or buy a van or whatever it is that I'm going to do to increase my productive capacity. Okay? It's all coming about because we've redefined the word investment. Okay, so makes no sense at all with the English. Makes sense with the jargon for investment that we've done here. Okay. All right. So, if we've got this, I'm saying, so we've said that if the interest rate goes up, investment goes down, right? And if we think about planned aggregate expenditure, it's what? C plus I plus G plus net exports. So if the interest rate goes from 3% to 5%, this bit here is going to fall. Investment is going to fall. And so this whole curve is going to shift downward. And so if we increase the interest rate, firms are going to spend less. They're going to be loaning people money, but that doesn't increase our productive capacity. Right? They're not going to be buying goods and services with that money. They're going to be loaning it to somebody. And if the interest rate goes up, then they cut back on their investment. The whole curve shifts down, and output goes down. The miracle of the multiplier still happens, and output shifts to the left. Okay? Output gets lower. So we can reduce output by increasing the interest rate, and we can increase output by reducing the interest rate. Right? Somebody's loaning money to Jim. If we reduce the interest rate enough, it's no longer attractive to loan the money to Jim. They're going to use it for something productive if they've got any ideas at all. Okay, this is the idea. Now, there's a lot of steps in this chain, and we haven't gone through them. Like, it's going to take us weeks, honestly, weeks to go through. This is a complicated chain, actually. So if you're not 100% with the program here, that's normal. But the thing I want to show you is that monetary policy in this graph is going to look just like fiscal policy did. It's going to shift this curve up and down. Right? It's going to do it by this long chain of events. When we increase government spending was right there, so it just shifted it up directly. Here, there's like a long chain of events that we're going to have to trace out. How do they change the interest rate? Is the interest rate really what they're looking at? Is it the nominal interest rate? Is it the real interest rate? That's going to be an issue for us. Do they really change their investment just because interest rate went down? There's a lot of links to the chain here. But the idea is going to be, in the end, if it all works out, if all the links in the chain hold, that it's just going to shift this line up and down in just the same way that government spending shifted it up and down. So in the model, all we got is this line shifting up and down. We can shift it up by expansionary policies, or we can shift it up by either increasing government spending, reducing taxes, or reducing the interest rate, so that investment looks attractive compared to other options, financial options. Right? Or we can shift it down by reducing government spending, increasing taxes, or raising the interest rate, so that these financial options look really great compared to doing anything real. Okay? And that's going to be the idea. And I put this here not because you should be convinced at this stage, but because we've been playing around with the model. You should see where it's going to fit into the model at the end. Okay. All right. One thing just to point out, we touched on this before. This is just sort of completionist at this stage. We have this multiplier. In our particular model, it was 1 over 1 minus c. But don't memorize that. Other models will have different ones. I should be able to tell you a story, and you should be able to figure out whether the multiplier is larger or smaller. Right? So for example, it is worth thinking on your own, and we can come back to it later, but like think on your own, is the multiplier, if we compared two countries, all else being equal, if we compared Ireland, a small country, with China, a larger country, which one do you think would have a bigger multiplier? Okay. And you should be able to figure this out. Okay. And the key thing about this, the key thing to start you going, is that in Ireland, if we go out and buy some random thing, it is more likely to be imported than if a Chinese person goes out and buys some random thing, because we are a small country, loads of things aren't made here, right? Okay. So that's the multiplier. You increase government spending, government buys a bunch of haircuts, those guys feel rich, they go out and buy stuff. The tax multiplier is what happens if we reduce taxes. And taxes only have an indirect effect, right, on output. That is, you reduce somebody's taxes, they're nice, they say thank you very much, but that didn't change output directly the way that the government buying haircuts did, right? And so you miss that first stage. But the guy still feels rich, and he goes out and buys stuff, right? So with the government spending, everything that you spent happened, somebody felt rich, and he goes out and buys something. With the taxes, you reduce someone's taxes, they feel rich, they go out and buy something. So you only get the second effect, the second stage on, right? And so how much they feel rich is just the marginal propensity to consume times the amount you change the taxes. So the tax multiplier is marginal propensity to consume times the other multiplier. It's always going to be less. Negative, of course, because if you increase taxes, people feel poor, right? But just the magnitude of it is MPC times the other multiplier. I already said that, so we won't. Okay. How are we doing? We have 10 minutes, so let me start. Okay. Well, now our next thing is money and interest rates. And we're going to do a lot of we spend a lot of time talking about what is money and what does money do for us so that we can understand how money gets integrated in the economy. Where we're going with this is talking about how central banks work, how they influence the interest rate. Okay? Because we saw in the last thing that if they can affect the interest rate and firms respond to that, they can maybe affect real things like investment. Okay? But it's going to be a long chain to get there. So we're going to start with what money is. Okay. Now we'll talk the demand and supply of money. Demand for money always strikes people as weird. How much do I demand? I demand it all. I want it all. But lots of things are like that, right? You want all the cars you want, but anyway, we're going to have a demand for money. We're going to have a supply of money. There's going to be a line up. There's going to be a line down. There's going to be a magic point where they cross. It'll remind you of the old days in micro. And then importantly, where we're going is how do central banks control the money supply and the interest rate? So what is money? Now, when I was in your shoes, way back in the day, I was sitting in a class. And it wasn't I took lots of economics classes, obviously. But I also took other classes. I took other classes, honest, I did. And I even passed some of them. You'd be shocked. And I was sitting in an anthropology class. And there was one of the more famous people in San Francisco State University, which wasn't chock-a-block with famous people, generally speaking. We got way more here than they had there. But she was fairly famous. She was a fairly famous anthropologist. And she had economist friends. And she would say, my economist friends say that every society has money. It is a natural human thing. If you don't have money, money will be automatically created. You can't have a society without money. And he said, well, that's all fun and games. But over the summer, I was off in this village in Indonesia, and they don't have any money. So, theory is great, but meet these guys. They don't do money. And it's I was like a little jerk, but I knew enough to shut up at that stage. But I was arguing with her in my head. But it was only months later when I realized, that's because we have redefined the word money in economics, and it doesn't mean what English language means. And so she's talking English like a normal person, and her economist friends has forgotten that they've redefined the term. And so they're talking past each other, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to start off and we're going to redefine the word money. And money won't mean what it means in English anymore. Okay? It's going to mean something that you'll see. And we're going to say money is going to going to be anything that does what money does. So it's a very nice circular definition. So we're bound to be safe. If they don't have ice cream, well, they don't have money. Well, they ate an ice cream, didn't they? Well, that's money because we defined it as money. So there, anthropology woman. But it's very circular, right? Anything that does what money does is going to be called money. Okay? And we're going to say the things that money does so broadly that there's always going to be money because those things have to happen. Like, to some extent, those things are going to happen. And money is anything that does those things. So we're kind of defining our way out of the anthropologist's gotcha. Money is anything. It's the air you breathe, man. So in that sense, it's not going to be useful. But it's going to be useful to us because we are going to be wanting to track these functions. And money is going to be the thing that does those functions. And so if we're paying attention to those functions, it's nice to pay attention to anything that does those functions, right? So our three functions are going to be, it's going to be a medium of our exchange. That's going to be our main one. We're going to focus on that mostly for this class. But it also does other things. It's a unit of account, and it's a store of value. Depending on the book you have, they may have 5 or 6 things that they say money does. It does all sorts of things. These are going to be the 3 that we're going to focus on here. Okay. Everyone has a sort of different definition. The important thing to notice is that money is going to do a lot for us. Okay. A lot of things that we sort of take for granted are actually things that we have, put on this concept of money. So our important one is going to be a medium of exchange. And I think most people can grasp this pretty quickly. That is, if I'm late to class again, and so I got to get to UCD quick. Let me grab a taxi. And I get in a taxi, and all I got is my little brain and my talkative tongue. And so I get in the taxi, and all I've really got is economics. And so I say to the taxi driver, take me to UCD, and on the way, I will give you a lecture on the purposes of money. And they say, oh, God help me, another one. Those economists are always late. But so clearly, there are some people, bless your hearts, who apparently, for some reason, want to hear a lecture on the uses of money, apparently. It's called revealed preference. If you didn't want to, why are you here? But degree, I know you got to get a degree. But so you want this lecture on money, but the taxi driver probably not so much, right? He probably could care less about that, or he may already know it, right? He may be an economist himself and just moved up to the taxi driving world. And so he knows this stuff. He doesn't want what I've got. And so what I have to do in order to get a ride to UCD is I have to find somebody who wants what I have, while at the same time I want what they have. This is called a double coincidence of wants. That we both have to want what the other guy has so that we can do a swap. Okay? And this clearly, in a modern economy, is really hard because I have really, really esoteric, weird skills that only a complete weirdo would be interested in. Welcome. And so it's going to be hard for me. In a traditional economy, I can do better with this, right? If I got chickens and you got sheep, we can probably work out a swap between us. But you might be off the red meat. I don't know, your life, right? And so maybe we can't. So we need to have this double coincidence of wants, and the more complicated and sort of specialized society is, the harder that is to arrange. Okay? And so money is what makes it easy to do these swaps. I can go into the cab and give this guy money, and he will accept the money happily because he knows that he can pass it off to some other sucker who will give him a sandwich at the end of the day. And I can come here and give you guys lectures, and I don't need anything from you except your money, and I'm happy with that because I can give it to a cabbie. And so we don't have to have these double coincidence of wants. I don't have to want what you have in order to give you a lecture. A whole money system will take care of that. They'll give me these euros, and I can spend those directly. I have a feeling from the rumblings that it's time to go, so I will let you go. And see you on Thursday.